Accidental Marriage by Shadina. Chapter 10. Once again, Ed found himself on a train with Roy, only this time he wasn't sick. He looked out the window, watching the colors of the scenery fly by him, like someone had just threw a bucket of water on a newly finished painting. At least that's what it looked like when he wasn't focusing on it. Roy was sitting across from him, arms folded over his chest and his eyes closed. He envied the man. Ed just couldn't find it in himself to fall asleep at the moment. If Al was here, he'd have some company, and the two of them would play cards and chat, but with Roy, the old man just closed his eyes and went to sleep before the train even left the station 3 hours ago. How long could he sleep? Was he going to do that the whole way to Seacoal? That would be lame. At least when Roy was awake, he'd have someone to argue with to pass the time. Ed's foot tapped anxiously as he stared at the man across from him, mentally yelling at him to wake the hell up. He looked around as if he expected someone else to be there. A devious little smile came across Ed's face as he turned his attention back to his sleeping prey. He slowly rose up from his seat, pulling out a marker he had snatched from one of the waitresses when she had last come into their car. He uncapped it and leaned over to Ed, the black felt tip in position, as he tried to decide what to start with.
Sit down.
A growl arose from what should have been a sleeping victim. He frowned. You're awake!
I've been awake.
He opened his eyes partially to glare at the youth. How long have you been awake? He asked him.
I didn't go to sleep,
he told Edward. You bastard! I thought you went to sleep!
So, go sit down, Full Metal.
He ordered him.
Give me that marker.
He held out his hand expectantly, Ed muttered unintelligibly, and handed him the marker. They sat in silence for 5 more minutes, but Ed kept fidgeting, much to Roy's irritation.
If you have to go to the bathroom, it's at the end of the car. Surely you don't need me to go with you,
he said. I don't have to go, you bastard, and if I did, I wouldn't need you to come with me. Roy opened his eyes a bit to look at him.
Then sit still.
I'm bored, he whined.
How does your brother deal with you?
Ed shot him a glare. Normally we talk and play cards.
Well, I don't have cards on me, do you?
Ed leaned back into the cushioned seat, his arms crossed over his chest, looking away, pouting, an effective no as far as Roy was concerned.
Well, you may not have to go to the bathroom, but I do.
Roy sat and got up, stretched his back. As he did so, he left, leaving Ed alone for a bit. Ed went back to watching the scenery pass by. Eventually, he heard the door slide open, assuming Roy had just entered, thus he didn't look his way. He was rather put out at the moment.
Scored a pretty blonde's phone number,
he heard the colonel say. He turned to demand why he would care about something like that, and weren't they supposed to be a freaking mission? But the words died on his lips when he saw the phone number. Well, it wasn't the phone number per se, but rather what was written on it. Those are cards. Roy nodded his head and looked at them.
She didn't have any paper on her, and she was selling these, so she wrote it on them,
he explained, and then went to pocket them. Ed's eyes followed the cards. What was he doing? Surely they could play now that he had some. Why was he putting them in his pocket? Surely he wasn't going to make him ask to play cards. Gold eyes flickered up to look at the older man's face that seemed to content to go back into fake sleep. He frowned. Yep, he was going to make him ask. Ed had a mental battle over if he should ask or not. But all those hours they had left on the train made him swallow his pride. Oi, now you have cards, can we, play? He managed to get out. Roy opened his eyes and looked at the blonde and smiled a bit. He should reward good behavior.
Sure,
he said, and pulled the cards out for him. The two of them played cards for the next several hours. Ed even won a few rounds, but if you talked to Roy about it, he'd simply tell you he was humoring him. Ed had been determined to dress himself. Roy supposed he didn't blame him, but really, did it honestly take this long to do it? True, all women seem to take forever getting dressed, and admittedly, he had never dressed in feminine clothing, but he knew how long it took to get them off, and it wasn't that hard. Thus, getting that stuff on couldn't be that much harder. Roy was nearly ready to head back into their hotel room to see what the hell was taking his blonde cross-dressing subordinate so long. He stopped when he saw Ed wearing the same red and gold kimono he saw him in earlier.
Edwin,
he corrected himself.
I thought you drowned in the clothing. I was just coming up to save you,
he said with a chuckle. The already irritated Ed only gave him a more bland look, if it was possible. You're hilarious. The comment was so Not Edish that it caused Roy to scramble as to what to say. Instead, Ed just grabbed his arm and led him out of the hotel before he could come up with something. The doorman opened the door for them, but Roy didn't have time to tip the man as Ed pulled him out onto the sidewalk.
We had time, Edlin.
He sighed and forced his partner to walk slower.
Don't worry, you passed with flying colors,
he said quietly. Ed's eye twitched. That's supposed to make me feel better? He hissed. It wasn't long before they were at the Lovers Festival. Everyone was walking arm in arm with somebody. There was live music around almost every corner. Food stands, which with Ed had to be the first stop. Vendors selling jewelry, clothes, lotions, and such were yelling with roused voices about their products, attempting to get giggling googly eyes to focus on what they were saying long enough to attract them to their stand. Ed looked around, the excitement of the festival getting to him more than to Roy, who more or less kept his mind on the mission, and thus was looking around for anything suspicious. Ed hung off Roy's arm, planning on using this time to his advantage. Roy couldn't say anything about it. Roy could claim this was hormones or shit like this, and Ed could say it was simply for the mission if ever questioned. Actually, it was nice, and he was going to enjoy it while he could. He pulled Roy, like an eager female, or teenager, to a vendor that was selling interesting trinkets. Roy let Ed look while his eyes scanned the crowd for a moment. Ed smirked a bit and picked up a red beaded bracelet. He turned to Roy and said in a sickeningly sweet voice, "Honey bunny, will you buy this for me?" he pleaded. Roy raised an eyebrow but said nothing to the nickname or the tone of voice Ed was using, instead taking the bracelet with interest. The vendor, a chubby guy that carried most of his weight in his gut, much like a stereotypical baker would. His black hair seemed to prefer to reside on his upper lip and brow bone rather than on his head. He smiled pleasantly. Yes, miss, that is an excellent choice, very popular. From Xing, said to help make your sex life, but, He winked. Roy's eyes widened, and the red bracelet fell to the dusty ground. Damn. He cursed and leaned over to pick it up, hearing Ed snicker. Sorry about that, he said, trying to offer it back to the vendor. We don't need something like this. The older man frowned. I can't take that. You dropped it in the dirty road. I can't even resale it now. Look at it. It's filthy. Roy frowned.
Give me a rag and I'll clean it.
It's been on the floor. No, you must buy it. You damaged my merchandise.
You have got to be kidding me. It was just on the floor. There's no scratches on it,
he argued. You'll have to buy it. The man pressed it further.
Fuck it,
he said, angry, and pulled his wallet and gave the man the money and yanked Edward on, handing him the bracelet, which slowed his pace down. Ed laughed as he slipped it on.
You did that on purpose,
Roy accused him. Ed got a mischievous look on his face, one that Roy had a feeling he should be frightened about. No, I did this on purpose. He used his automail hand and pulled Roy into an alley for privacy and pressed him against the stone wall and leaned up to kiss him again. Ed may not know if this was simply hormones or not, nor did he give a damn. Right now, this was what he wanted. Chapped lips against surprisingly smoothed ones. Ed liked it and wondered how the colonel managed to have such soft lips. His were torn up from traveling the desert, dealing with wind, sand, and sun, or even the colder climates. Of course, Roy didn't travel as much as he did, so perhaps that was it. He started to press his tongue in the older man's mouth. For Roy, this had to be the worst kiss he had ever had in his entire life, and yet it was exciting. There was just something intoxicating and seemingly of addictive nature here. However, the boy needed to learn how to kiss. He opted to switch the positions and show him how you're really supposed to kiss someone. He pressed Ed against the stone wall, this time taking full control of the kiss. His arm wrapped around his waist as he laid claim to the red-cladded cross-dresser in his arm's mouth. For Ed's part, he was being swept away by the kiss he hadn't even known he had been longing for. The hot mouth pulled away from Ed's, and he opened his eyes to look up at Roy. He saw his head lean back down and tilted his chin up to meet him again. However, Roy took advantage of this and started to kiss his neck, sucking the salty sweat from his skin, bringing out a low groan from Ed's throat, Ed's hand finding its way into Roy's hair. The Asian man pulled away, ready to claim Ed's mouth, when his world suddenly blacked out for some unexplainable reason. The blonde grunted, but the taller man's weight suddenly rested on him completely. Gold Eyes looked up and saw a shadow before he was struck at the temple, and his world went dark as well.